There are stories that are not born by chance. They germinate slowly, between silence, fanaticism, and fear, and few are as dark as that of Edward Theodore Gein, the man who inspired Psycho, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. But before becoming the Butcher of Plainfield, Ed Gein was just a boy, isolated, timid, and molded by a woman obsessed with purity and guilt. Edward was born on August 27, 1906, on a farm in rural Wisconsin, surrounded by forests and long winters that seemed endless. The house he grew up in was quiet, but there was no peace there. His father, George Gein, was a defeated alcoholic who drifted from job to job. But the true force inside that home had another name: Augusta Gein. Augusta believed the world was a place of immorality and sin. She preached to her son that all women, except herself, were instruments of the devil. For Augusta, sex was the seed of damnation, and love, a weakness. From an early age, Edward learned that the world outside the farm was dangerous. His mother kept him away from everything and everyone. He went to school but had no friends. He laughed alone in the corner of the classroom, murmured disconnected phrases, and came home carrying only the echoes of his mother's voice. While the other children played, Ed read verses about divine punishment and death. He was a boy trapped between innocence and fanaticism. Every afternoon, Augusta gathered her sons to read the Old Testament. She spoke of destruction, retribution, and sin, and Edward listened to every word as if it were a personal prophecy. He believed he had been chosen, not to love the world, but to fear it. But there was something more there, a sick kind of dependence, a love that mixed reverence and submission. To Ed, his mother was everything: God, law, and truth. Every word she spoke became a commandment. When his father died in 1940, the small family circle shrank even more. Ed and his brother Henry began doing manual labor for neighbors, chopping wood, fixing fences, tending farms. But Henry saw what Ed could not: the invisible prison they lived in. He spoke ill of their mother, called her a fanatic, tried to open Ed's eyes, and every word against Augusta sounded to Ed like blasphemy. In 1944, the brothers decided to burn some marsh vegetation on the farm. The fire got out of control and drew the fire department. When the flames were finally extinguished, Henry was missing. A few hours later, Ed led the men straight to his brother's body. He seemed to know exactly where to look. The body lay face down, without visible burns, but with strange marks on his head. The police concluded it was an accident, death by asphyxiation. But there was never an autopsy, and for years the question lingered. Had Ed killed his own brother? With Henry dead and his father buried, only Augusta remained. But fate seemed ready to shatter the last link of sanity in Edward's mind. A few months later, his mother suffered a stroke. Ed cared for her devotedly, feeding, washing, obeying. But the illness had made her even more bitter. She despised everything and everyone, except her son. One afternoon, they went to visit a neighbor. During the visit, Augusta saw the man brutally beating a dog. Ed tried to calm her, but what truly enraged her was seeing a woman come out of the house. A woman who, according to her, was not married to the man. "Prostitute," Augusta whispered, trembling with hatred. Shortly after, she had another stroke. On December 29, 1945, Augusta Gein died. Ed was alone for the first time, and with her, the only link that tied him to reality also died. He locked the rooms where she lived, the parlor, the bedroom, the stairs, and kept them untouched, like a mausoleum. The rest of the house turned into a cemetery of dust and silence. And within that silence, something began to grow. Something that didn't come from madness, but from loneliness. After Augusta's death, the Gein farm became a place where time stopped. The smell of old wood and damp earth permeated everything. Ed lived there, among memories and ghosts, tending what remained, like the caretaker of a grave he called home. He kept the upper floor, where his mother slept, untouched. He covered the furniture, locked the doors, and sealed the past behind dusty walls. It was as if the house breathed through two worlds, the dead and the living. Downstairs, filth took over. Newspapers piled up, food rotted. But upstairs, Augusta's room remained pure, silent, sacred. By day, Ed did odd jobs to survive. He fixed fences, painted barns, tended crops. Sometimes he worked as a babysitter, and neighborhood children described him as kind but strange. He seemed more comfortable among children than adults. perhaps because deep down, he had never stopped being a boy trapped by his mother's rules. At night, however, silence ruled the house, and it was in that silence that Ed's mind began to open. He spent hours reading bizarre magazines, stories about cannibals, Nazi crimes, and human experiments. One name in particular sparked his fascination: Ilse Koch, the woman who had lampshades made from the skin of concentration camp prisoners. That mix of power and morbidity lit something inside him. But it wasn't just curiosity, it was identification. Ed began visiting the local cemetery. At first, he told himself he just wanted to see his mother. He would sit on Augusta's grave and talk to her for hours. But as the months passed, something changed. He began to dream of her, alive, yet cold, with pale skin and soulless eyes. In the dreams, Augusta called to him, whispered that he should never drift away from her. And when he awoke, the house seemed to echo with those nocturnal murmurs. In 1947, Ed began to dig. He would later confess that at times he felt as though he were in a trance, guided by a force he could not understand. He visited cemeteries in the middle of the night and unearthed the corpses of women who resembled his mother. He took parts home, as if each fragment could rebuild her. That farm, once merely old and lonely, had become a diseased laboratory. The walls housed pieces of an impossible obsession: skulls used as bowls, masks made from human skin, chairs upholstered with tanned flesh, and clothes made from female skin. Ed would wear these skins before the mirror. He said he wanted to become his mother. It was no longer about remembering Augusta, it was about being Augusta. He believed that by wearing the woman's skin, he could restore her power and presence within himself. It was a macabre transformation, a metamorphosis between man and the ghost that created him. Despite rumors about his odd behavior, no one suspected what was happening inside the farm. Plainfield was a small town where everyone knew each other, and no one wanted to imagine that the shy, quiet man was capable of such monstrosity. But loneliness slowly turned into mental claustrophobia. Ed began to fantasize about living women. He watched them in shops, on the streets, wondering if he could recreate them in his own way. In 1954, a woman disappeared, Mary Hogan, owner of a local tavern. She was known for her sharp tongue and strong temper. One day she simply vanished, leaving behind only bloodstains and a .22 caliber shell on the floor. For months no one knew what had happened, but in Ed's mind she wasn't lost. She had come home. In the following years he continued his nocturnal visits, mixing real corpses with delirious memories. And while the town slept, Plainfield silently hid the birth of one of the most terrifying chapters in American history. The Ed Gein farm was no longer just a home. It was a sanctuary of death. Plainfield, November 1957. Winter was approaching, covering the small town with snow and silence. But that Saturday morning, something was different. The calm had been broken. Bernice Warden's hardware store was open, but empty. The cash register was gone. On the floor, a thin trail of blood led to the back door and disappeared into the cold wind. Bernice was a respected woman, known by everyone. And when her son, Deputy Frank Warden, found the place like that, his heart froze. He soon realized the last name written in the sales book was Ed Gein. The police went to the farm. Ed's house was just a few miles away, an old farmhouse surrounded by dead cornfields and the smell of old smoke. When the officers entered, they had to use flashlights. The windows were covered, the air thick, and what they saw inside did not belong to the human world. In the barn, hanging upside down, was Bernice Warden. Her body had been opened from neck to waist, drained of blood, and butchered like an animal. But the horror didn't end there. Inside the house, police found masks made from human faces, bowls carved from skulls, furniture covered in skin, and jars filled with preserved organs. On the stove, a pot was boiling, with chunks of flesh and bone, and in a dark room, amid newspapers and filth, they found something even more disturbing. A full female skin suit, complete with breasts, mask and belt made from human parts. Ed Gein wore it on moonlit nights, dancing before the mirror, believing he had become his mother again. Soon after, Ed was found at a nearby grocery store, calmly drinking coffee. When police approached, he simply smiled and said quietly, "She's on the farm, like the others." During interrogation, Ed spoke with chilling calm. He said he didn't remember everything, that sometimes he went into a trance. He admitted to only 2 murders, Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden, but confessed to exhuming more than 10 bodies from the local cemetery. He said the dead women spoke to him, that they begged to be freed from the earth, and that by wearing their skin he felt Augusta's presence. Alive again, the photos shocked investigators, and later, the world. The horror of Plainfield became a symbol of American insanity. The case was so striking it would inspire decades of films and nightmares. Psycho, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Silence of the Lambs, all born from the shadows of that farm. The press called Ed Gein the butcher of Plainfield. But what most intrigued psychiatrists wasn't the brutality. It was the motive. Ed didn't seem to feel pleasure in pain. His crimes weren't driven by hate or lust, but by something deeper, a sick need to rebuild the love he had lost. In his twisted mind, he wasn't killing women. He was transforming them into Augusta. Every cut, every stitch, every piece was a desperate attempt to resurrect the only bond he had ever known. The horror was, in essence, a deformed love story. When asked why he did it, Ed simply replied, "She never left. I just wanted her to come back." That night marked the end of normality in Plainfield, and the beginning of a myth. The man who crossed the border between longing and madness. The discovery of Ed Gein's crimes spread like wildfire. Plainfield, once a forgotten dot on the map, became synonymous with horror. Reporters arrived from everywhere. Helicopters hovered over the farm, and crowds gathered along the dirt road, hoping to glimpse the monster. But those who saw Ed in person said something different. He didn't look like a killer. There was no fury, no coldness, only a thin man with vacant eyes and a naive smile. He seemed not to understand what he had done. Ed Gein's trial began in November 1957, but was repeatedly interrupted. Doctors declared him unfit for trial. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and severe psychosis. He claimed his mother still watched him, and that he heard voices from the locked room upstairs, untouched for more than a decade. In 1968, after years of treatment at the Central State Hospital in Wisconsin, the trial finally proceeded. During the session, jurors heard, in detail, what had been found at the farm. Photos, objects, confessions. Many couldn't bear it. Some vomited. Others left the courtroom in silence. The psychiatrist who examined him described Ed as a man complete, only in the presence of death. He said Gein saw in corpses a form of emotional reconnection, as if decay were a path to eternity. In the end, the jury found him not guilty by reason of insanity. Ed Gein was sent to a maximum security psychiatric institution. There he lived for the next 26 years. Inside the hospital walls, Ed became a strangely popular figure. He drew pictures, tended the garden, and spent hours reading comic books and crime magazines. Sometimes he laughed alone, as if speaking to someone invisible. He would say, "Mother is proud now." Meanwhile, the outside world turned his story into legend. Hollywood drew inspiration from him to create Norman Bates in Psycho, 1960, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, 1991. 3 different characters, all born from the same darkness, Ed Gein's mind. The farm was put up for auction, but before it could be sold, it mysteriously caught fire. Some said it was angry locals, wanting to erase the town's shame. Others claimed Ed himself had asked that no one ever go there again. All that remained was ash and silence, as if the earth had finally digested its secrets. On July 26, 1984, Ed Gein died in the hospital at the age of 77. Official cause, respiratory failure due to cancer. He was buried beside his mother, Augusta, in the Plainfield Cemetery, the same place where he had once robbed graves. But even in death, he found no peace. Morbid fans visited his grave, leaving offerings, crosses, and notes. Until in 2000, his headstone was stolen, later found in a Seattle cemetery. The name Ed Gein became more than a story. It became a mirror, a dark reflection of what happens when loneliness, fanaticism, and trauma blend until the line between love and madness disappears. He wasn't the most lethal serial killer in history, but perhaps the most symbolic. Because his crimes weren't born from hate, but from the absence of love, and maybe deep down, that's the most terrifying face of all. Today, the place where the farm once stood is just an empty field. No marker, no plaque. But locals say that on certain nights, the wind blows with a strange sound, as if someone were calling Augusta's name, and for a brief moment a distant echo seems to reply, "Mama, I'm here." Here.